Beautiful. Thanks, Jackie. A bit of housekeeping before we begin. There will be questions at the end. So if you do have questions, there will be an option on the chat for you to insert that in there, and we'll get to them right at the end. All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Pro Patria Centre webinar, From Chronic Pain to Everyday Wellness. It's our pleasure to introduce Dr. Jeremy Lim, a medical doctor, educator, and researcher with experience across lifestyle and integrative medicine, metabolic health, rehabilitation medicine, and clinical education. Dr. Lim currently works as a lifestyle and integrative medicine doctor with the National Institute of Integrative Medicine and is a metabolic health clinician. His clinical background also includes emerging medicine, rehabilitation medicine, and the coordination of multidisciplinary care for people experiencing complex health conditions. He's a board member of the Australian and New Zealand College of Cannabinoid Medicine Incorporated and has a strong interest in evidence-based whole person approaches that bring together nutrition, movement, sleep, stress management, social connection, and the endocannabinoid system. Today, Dr. Lim will explore how these interconnected elements may help some people living with chronic pain reduce inflammation, improve daily function, build sustainable habits that support long-term well-being. Please welcome Dr. Jeremy Lim. Thank you, Dr. Lim.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for the kind introduction, Frosty. And thank you both to Jackie and Jason for, giving me a platform to share about what I'm doing in this space in medicine. So welcome everyone to my talk today. I wrote this talk specifically, catered towards the veterans with PPC. And I hope, you find something useful from it. A bit about myself. As Jason mentioned, I work in lifestyle and integrative medicine. I work here in Victoria at the National Institute of Integrative Medicine, where I've had the chance to work with some of the pioneering professors that I guess have grown the space in holistic medicine. This is a space where I feel very passionate about. Throughout my medical career, I've never thought health has been contained in pills. Or in surgery alone necessarily. I think those are very beneficial tools that doctors have been given control over. But I really believe in the ability of human beings to heal themselves through holistic ways. And this is what, this is where I'm growing my career in medicine. I do work across a multitude of jobs, but my specific interest in acute and chronic pain comes from the fact that I work a lot with workplace injuries, meaning that, if a tram driver or if a fireman twist their ankles, I work for a company that has contracts, and we basically manage their injuries and rehabilitate them back into work. I've been working here for, quite a few years now, and this is, one of my passions. It's getting people back to what they love doing. And so I also take a holistic view in medicine. As Jason mentioned, I sit on the board of the College of Cannabinoid Medicine. So obviously I don't speak for the entire organization. I wrote this talk by myself for PPC, but I'm trying to pioneer space in medicine that focuses on something called the endocannabinoid system. For those of you that were watching, the previous webinar with Justin Kanda, that's a system in physiology that basically regulates homeostasis. We'll talk more about the ECS later, as well as, endocannabinology later. But first things first, conflicts of interest. I have nothing to declare today. Not being paid by any pharmaceutical companies or anything. And secondly, as a disclaimer, obviously for legal purposes, because I don't know anyone in the room individually, I cannot offer any individualized medical advice. All of this is for general educational purposes and maybe entertainment purposes as well only. I hope you guys are entertained and engaged by my talk. Today, I want to talk about chronic pain. I think this is a space where education can go a long way in solving a lot of problems in this space. So I really think, this is something that I hope you guys find it useful. I initially, when I was coming up with the talk, I initially called it From Chronic Pain to Everyday Wellness, but I halfway renamed the talk when I was tailoring it to the friends of PPC. I renamed the talk The Shield because I genuinely believe that human beings have this ability to nurture their own health and to, in doing so, create a shield for themselves to protect their health and also to protect themselves from chronic pain. So the few objectives of the talk today, first things first, we want to understand chronic pain. We want to understand how it's different from acute pain, or which is short term. And when we understand chronic pain better, actually, we actually have a bigger ability to remedy it and to combat it. And then second thing, I want to talk about lifestyle as a foundational medicine, obviously, because I work in lifestyle medicine. I could go on for hours about the different things that people have in their ability, to heal themselves through lifestyle medicine. And then thirdly, I want to link it back to the endocannabinoid system, which is a space in medicine where I'm trying to grow right now. First things first, we want to cover the neuroscience of acute pain. So when we first started to understand pain, scientists would look at nerve cells and scientists would look at the brain and nervous system because, when we figured out that the nervous system was the main thing that allows human beings to experience pain, we wanted to understand it because maybe if we understand it better, we could help people who are struggling with pain. And so on the right here, you can see, these nerve cells, mainly A delta and C fibers are the main types of fibers that transmit pain. And obviously they're taken by peripheral nerves and they go up the spinal cord and towards the brain. Obviously, what happens in the brain is quite complex. Different centers in the brain are responsible for the person experiencing what they call pain. Taken all together, this whole process, we call it the neuroscience of nociception. Nociception is basically the process by which the nervous system allows us to feel pain. So there are 4 steps to it. Transduction, which is, where an inflammatory or an injurious process trigger nerve fibers that send signals to the spinal cord. Once again, it goes up, it's perceived in the brain. There's a 4th step here called modulation. We're not going to talk about it until later, but just remember this slide and remember the 4th step, which is modulation, because it'll come back around later. So pain is actually a safety system. This wonderful complex occurrence that occurs that is most of the time annoying to us is actually a system that has developed in physiology to keep us safe. And it has very clear utility in our survival. If, for example, I have severe pain in my jaw, that gives me an alarm of a warning that something is going on. Maybe I have a bad oral mucosal abscess, boiling infection that needs to be incised and drained. Or for example, if I'm doing a lot of manual labor, I spend a weekend working on the yard and then my shoulder is acting up for the next few days. That gives me the idea that, hey, maybe I've caused some strain and some inflammation in my shoulder. And that gives me the knowledge that something there needs to be addressed. Either through taking some medication, either through resting it, or going to seek medical input. Pain is actually a really useful signal. And even then, taking it a step further, understanding how the different types of pain are caused. So there's 3 types of pain: nociceptive, neuropathic, which is where the nerves are annoyed and they're sort of experiencing pain through just the nerves being either pressed on or inflammation from the nerves, like in multiple sclerosis, for example, where there's demyelination in an autoimmune process. Or things like nociplastic pain that we're more and more beginning to understand, things like fibromyalgia, things like restless leg syndrome that don't quite fit anywhere. But understanding different types of pain actually allows doctors and allows people also. When you understand something, that's the first step to really remedying it and treating it. Now, acute pain, which is what I've been talking about, nociception, the physiology of pain, is slightly different from chronic pain. It's very similar. They share a lot of the same machinery, but acute pain and chronic pain are almost like the difference between soccer and footy, right? Both times you're kicking a ball, but the games and the goalpost is slightly different. And when you're remedying chronic pain versus remedying acute pain, the approach is different. First things first, let's talk about chronic pain in Australia, because it's really a big burden in our society. Chronic pain is defined as pain that goes on for more than 3 to 6 months. There's a process, that we'll talk about in a bit called central sensitization, where the modulatory pathway of pain has been altered. Regardless, people who experience, there are many Australians who experience pain for more than 3 to 6 months. So that's 1 in 5 Australians, or 20% of our adult population, experience chronic pain. And it really costs us a lot of money. It costs us 73 billion as a good estimate in 2018. And because of, growing, I guess, workplace injuries or suffering in our community, that cost is set to increase, almost 3 times by the year 2050. And 213 billion is a lot of money. And then looking at the veteran population as well, there are about 5 to 600,000 veterans in Australia right now. The rates of chronic pain are higher than that in the average population. That's not surprising considering what veterans go through. It's between 27 to 57%. And then in female veterans, it's even higher. I know female veterans only make about 10% of the veteran population, but they both, struggle with higher rates of chronic pain as well as higher rates of comorbidity. So that's another population that, needs extra care for sure. In veterans, there's this term that's been coined called polytrauma, where there's overlapping symptomology of chronic pain, post-traumatic stress, as well as traumatic brain injury, and how those overlap into each other, affecting sleep, affecting mental health, and really affecting quality of life. And so for the people suffering with those conditions, quality of life is affected quite significantly. And because of that, mental health and suicide rates are quite high in this population. There was a royal commission done, as most of you are aware, into veteran suicide. They studied it for about 3 years, where they were taking, information and feedback from universities, and they came up with 122 recommendations, which is obviously a signal that, systemically, culturally, things need to change, I suppose. And it's good that they did that, because it gives us, guidance for the next few decades for how we can better care for vets. So as you know, chronic pain is not a singular thing. It's quite mixed into the entire human being, the thoughts they think, the community they're embedded in, whether they're socially isolated, whether or not they're able to have good sleep at night, whether or not they feel that they can relate well to the people around them, also the type of food they're eating, and the activities they do every day. Chronic pain is quite a multifaceted thing. And to understand how chronic pain occurs, we have to understand neuroplasticity. Most of us understand neuroplasticity as something positive, about how people can learn new things, people can learn new skills. When you go dancing, for example, and you learn some new steps, that's neuroplasticity in play, when your brain takes a complex skill like a language or a dance and it learns it. But your brain can also learn how to suffer from chronic pain, unfortunately, through processes like hyperalgesia, which is basically turning up the volume knob. The nervous system turns up the volume of pain sensitivity, and that helps. Doesn't help, but it causes the prolonging and higher levels of pain in the long term. And then the concept of allodynia as well, where sensations that are not pain, so sensations such as touch, can be perceived as pain by the nervous system in the long term. And so these are really problems that come up in chronic pain. As I mentioned, this slide did come back with step 4, modulation. Now, the brain plays a very powerful role in changing how the person experiences pain. So, let's just say you twist your ankle and you're aware of the pain there. A normal, healthy nervous system and brain, after a few days in, will say, hey, we're aware that your ankle is hurting. We don't have to experience pain at such high levels unless you retwist your ankle again, and then we need to be worried about it again, right? Because pain's a signal of danger. And so it modulates the pain that you're experiencing, it kind of turns it down. However, as I mentioned, through neuroplasticity and through a multitude of factors, modulation can go the wrong direction. It can actually turn pain up. It can also take sensations that are not pain and turn them into pain. And this is really where chronic pain becomes a different beast altogether than acute pain. We'll just skip this slide. As I mentioned, there are 3 types of pain, and understanding where your pain comes from allows you to remedy it. But what chronic pain really is, it's a disorder of the nervous system and a disorder of inflammation as well. I think those 2 things they clearly overlap when we look at people who experience pain from chronic injuries whose pain don't resolve. It's always a nervous system that isn't well regulated, is one way of putting it. A nervous system that does not rest well. So oftentimes, many of my patients with chronic pain, I can tell from the way they talk, from the way they think, that they're constantly in a state of fight or flight. They're constantly potentially catastrophizing things, constantly also seeing, not being able to positively relate to the outside world as well as to other people around them. And this puts their nervous system on guard. And it also, increases the possibility that the brain's going to take different sensations and turn up the volume of pain as well. So that's what chronic pain really is, and that's how it's different from pain. Pain is a safety alarm. It tells you about danger, like a fire alarm. If there's fire in the house, a fire alarm goes off. It allows you to act on it and put the fire out. But if the fire alarm goes off 24/7, you can't sleep, you can't relax. Your quality of life is going into the dumps. And I guess when we think about chronic pain, we don't think about the fire anymore, because there might not be a fire to put out, right? If you think about it like a fire alarm, if the fire alarm is broken, you don't go looking for a fire. You go looking for, how can I fix the alarm? Is it just batteries? Should I get a technician to come in to change it, for example? And that's how the approach differs, I suppose. You don't try to necessarily treat chronic pain the same way you treat pain through pills or surgery. It has to come from a holistic strategy, holistic framework that you can sort of allow the nervous system and the immune system to better regulate itself. And so this next part is about lifestyle medicine. As I mentioned, people have huge agency. They have huge untapped ability to take power into their own hands. And I think that's undermined quite a little bit. Most of the time when people think of their personal medical issues, they think, oh, I definitely need a really good doctor, or I definitely need a really good surgeon to help me get through this. All of that is true. You need really good health professionals that are competent, and you need to trust them, and you need to work with them and learn from them. I think that's all really useful. On the other hand, things like how you sleep, things like what you're eating 3 meals a day, the thoughts you think, your general practitioner has zero power over that. Your general practitioner does not have any power about how much alcohol you drink, how many inflammatory cigarettes you smoke in a day. All of that is really within your hands. And I believe, once again, human beings have so much power and agency to modulate whether or not chronic pain goes on in their life. So sleep. Can't talk about chronic pain without talking about sleep. This was a fantastic study. They mapped out, all of the physiological ways that sleep and chronic pain are interacting, and there are at least 10 to 12 different pathways that sleep deficiency interacts with chronic pain in a bidirectional relationship, meaning that if you have poor sleep, your chronic pain levels are going to be higher. And if your chronic pain levels are high, you're going to have poor sleep, because your circadian rhythm is very tightly linked to like your overall health. And I guess most of you might not know this, but even one night of poor sleep can increase pain levels by 15 to 30%, right? And that's just one night of poor sleep leading to an increased pain sensitivity. We know now that roughly 2 out of 3 Australians have sleep problems. And if you think about a person not getting good sleep for weeks, if not months, this is, I think, a huge source of the generation of chronic pain. And obviously, sleep problems are not easy to fix, especially if you already struggle from chronic pain. The vicious cycle is difficult to break out of. Obviously, you start with basic sleep hygiene. Once again, the ball's in your court when it comes to sleep hygiene. So it's things like not using phone screens in the evening, trying to keep your evenings away from blue light and low stimulus. Right? Don't try to solve your biggest problem 1 hour before bed. If you do, you're not going to fall asleep on time, right? And that's the other thing about sleep. One of the important things is regularity. I think previously doctors were all about sleep duration. Oh, you need 8 hours. You need 7 to 9 hours. Oh, you need more than 6 hours. I think what's more important actually is sleep regularity. People should have an anchored waking time and an anchored sleeping time 7 days a week. Mainly because the body is a clock. It works like clockwork. It secretes different hormones at different times. And if one day you're sleeping at 2 a.m. and one day you're sleeping at 10 p.m., you're going to throw your body clock off balance, and it's not going to be happy. Next thing, movement medicine. Excuse me. I'm just going to. Bit of a dry throat. Movement is medicine. That's one of my tropes. I think I cannot undersell the value of exercise. This landmark meta-analysis here is very telling, about the benefits of exercise. And they basically see this effect, and they've called it EIH, or exercise-induced hypoalgesia. That's really a fancy way of saying if you move your body, actually you experience lower levels of pain. What they found in this big study that I think incorporated about 27 or 28 trials is that all types of exercise actually benefit pain. Specifically, aerobic exercise coming in number 3. Aerobic exercises, it's like cycling, swimming, or walking, or jogging, for example. I think swimming or hydrotherapy is great, for people who struggle with people who struggle with degenerative musculoskeletal issues like, hip osteoarthritis or chronic back pain. Getting into a pool and walking laps even, can really improve pain levels. At least that's what I'm seeing in my clinical practice. Dynamic resistance exercise coming in at number 2 in terms of its effect on chronic pain. So those look like kind of going to the gym and training, doing push-ups and things like that. Obviously, the kind of resistance exercise you do should be specifically tailored to you by either an exercise physiologist or ideally a physiotherapist. And then, isometric coming out at the top. So isometric exercises are like things like wall sits or planks, where you're not really doing any movement, but your muscles are contracting to keep you in a specific position. So getting a specific exercise plan tailored to you, by a physiotherapist, I think is really critical if you're someone who struggles from chronic pain. Next, anti-inflammatory diet. As I mentioned, one of the causes of chronic pain as well is a dysregulated immune system, right? They call it inflammation, or they call it meta-inflammation right now, because there's so many things in our environment that cause inflammation in our bodies. Things in our water supply, things like microplastics, things like processed foods, all of the extra things that are added into that potentially in our clothes as well, that our bodies are exposed to. And so it's very important to have a diet or a dietary pattern that helps us combat inflammation. This team in Italy, they're very clever. They created what they call a modified Mediterranean diet. If you don't know, the Mediterranean diet is one of the diets that can be beneficial for people. I don't obviously recommend the same diet for everyone. I think things should be tailored. I've certainly heard a lot of benefits about the Mediterranean diet, diets that are, facilitate ketosis as well. I've heard a lot of benefit from in certain populations, but I think that diet should be individualized the same way like an exercise plan should be. And so, yeah, this team wanted to see if people with rheumatoid arthritis or rheumatic diseases with chronic pain could experience, lower levels of pain when they ate a modified Mediterranean diet. And their findings were very telling once again. Not only did their pain get better, their mental health improved, their sleep improved. And so the 45 participants in the study, had really good outcomes in this pilot study. I personally think diet's a very underrated, way of treating chronic pain as well. And then mind-body medicine. Mind-body medicine is fascinating. We naturally think about mental health and physical health as different aspects of a human being, but I think we're more and more seeing that psycho, neuro, endocrine, immune systems are all linked with each other. If a person's mentally suffering, there's very high chance that they're going to be physically suffering in another way, and vice versa. This one study here was fascinating, where this was a pain on acute. Sorry, this was a study on acute pain, and basically they got participants to do an activity in mindfulness, and they did some fMRI brain images, and what they found was that when a person participates in mindfulness type meditation activities, that they're able to uncouple the sense of self. So the sense of self is a big part of suffering, because you think about it, a big part of suffering comes from how you perceive your suffering. And we know this because people who tend to catastrophize or tend to magnify problems have higher levels of pain. And in the same way, your sense of self and your narrative about your suffering is very important in terms of how much you suffer. So if your narrative about yourself is that, the chronic pain or the pain is a huge problem that you can't overcome, then, the sense of self gets involved in the process of pain generation. But with this study here, they showed that mindfulness in meditation actually uncoupled the process of the self-suffering from the actual nociception. And people actually reported lower levels of pain, even though they were exposed to the same stimuli. So I think this is very critical. The mind is a very powerful tool. We cannot underestimate it. But I feel like I could talk about all of the ways that lifestyle and integrative medicine are growing today. As in previous talks, covering things like hyperbaric therapy, ketonic therapy, and I think Justin Kanner as well, we're talking about plant medicines and phytocannabinoid medicines. I think medicine is kind of finding its footing outside of the pharmaceutical space for the last 150 years, because science has driven our growth in I guess becoming a profession. Our reliance has been on medications and surgery, but more and more we're looking to things outside within our environment, within our behavior, to heal the human body. And once again, I could go on and on about lifestyle medicine. The studies I shared today are just a scratch in what can be done to remedy chronic pain. But I want to move to the next part of the talk, which is talking about how it ties in with the endocannabinoid system, the ECS, and how bringing the human body back to balance, which is central role of the ECS, is very important. As Justin Kanda mentioned in the last talk, scientists only really learned about and characterized the ECS, which is a system in physiology. We only found out really in the 1980s, I suppose. And it's only been about 40 years. And medicine is a big machine that moves very slowly and adopts new information very slowly. So very few clinicians are onto the ECS, I suppose. The ECS is unique because it cannot be found in a specific organ, just like the neurological system is found in the brain and your nerves, or the musculoskeletal system is found in your muscles, or your cardiovascular system is in your heart or your vessels. But the ECS is actually everywhere. It's on cell membranes. It's a regulatory cell signaling system. And this system uses lipids, which are, I guess, fat molecules, to communicate with other cells. And this system is, because it's everywhere, you know it's important, and it's involved in basically regulation of homeostasis. Homeostasis is, keeping the internal physiology in a livable state while the external environment changes. Because the human body has to, your blood pressure, things like your blood acidity, things like your oxygen levels, things like how fast your heart is beating, things like how your nervous system responds to things. All of this have to be kept in a very tight and narrow space of functioning. If it deviates a little bit, bad things happen. And so the endocannabinoid system, they call it the master regulatory system of homeostasis. It's really critical. And as Justin Kando was mentioned last week, more and more doctors need to learn about it. And so this recent study here talking about the ECS and how it's involved in reproductive physiology, it's also involved in the implantation of an egg or a zygote, and it becomes sort of a human baby over time. This development is largely facilitated by the ECS as well. So that was very interesting, and that was just published this year, actually. But this quote really rings out. The ECS impacts everything from mood, pain, and inflammation to heart health, hormone balance, digestion, energy metabolism, immune function, bone health, and neuroprotection. And those things I underlined there, those are critical when it comes to chronic pain, because things like your mood clearly affects how you perceive pain. The ECS directly regulates pain. The ECS directly regulates inflammation. The ECS directly regulates the nervous system and the immune system. So if you're talking about chronic pain, you definitely cannot leave the ECS behind. And once again, I think the ECS in the future, at least, not now, but in the future, is going to be central to the management of chronic pain. Yeah, I think this same slide covered what I'm talking about. So the endocannabinoid system is a self-intelligent system. It's once again your cells talking to each other through lipids. And it helps basically control the chaos in your body, or control any disorder that might come from the external environment. And in a well-regulated ECS, the ECS is the main thing, and it's foundational for health. So if you're someone that wants to nurture your health, if you're someone that wants to protect your immune system, protect your nervous system, right, definitely have to think about the ECS. This is very new. As part of my work with the Board of Cannabinoid Medicines, this is a framework that I want to put out to more clinicians. I call it, well, I don't call it anything. It's a word my friend mentioned. He called it endocannabinology. Which is what we would, I guess, name if a medical science were dedicated to the functioning of the ECS. For example, we have cardiologists, right? Maybe one day we'll have endocannabinologists. We don't currently have it because, the ECS is still new to doctors, but one day. But I want to put a pause there. I don't want to, I could drone out about the ECS and how it's important more if I could. I want to give everyone here, 3 tips for anyone suffering from chronic pain, or if there's someone they love suffering from chronic pain. I think, I want to leave someone with practicable steps to helping themselves. So I think simplifying your rehabilitation process is critical. There's a lot of information online now, and there's a lot of people who have chronic pain will see a lot of clinicians. But I think a good way to think about your rehabilitation is to think about it from 3 aspects. Number 1, medical oversight, right? What are your doctors doing for you? What are your pain specialists doing for you? What are your surgeons doing for you? And I think it's good for people to have a folder in their phone or in their computer, just summarizing all your medical documents, right? Because you need to have a good understanding of your health yourself, because that's what empowers you, right? That's why they say knowledge is power. So I guess having a good relationship with your GP, and then understanding what your physiotherapist is saying, your neurologist is saying, your pain specialist is saying, that's critical. Having a good understanding of your medical oversight. Secondly, lifestyle as a foundation to your healing process. I think I've covered that quite well. And then thirdly is your vocational goals, right? or your purpose, like what you're trying to do in life, because that's very important. And I'll just cover that in the next point as well. As I mentioned here, people who struggle with chronic pain have a lot of clinicians who are taking care of them. Sometimes it's difficult to access these clinicians. Regardless, it's important to have a team that you trust. I think the general practitioner is really a critical role in terms of understanding what your different specialists are saying. But I think you as an individual also have to take agency in what all your professionals are saying about you. If there are any medical documents, once again, I think compiling them into like easy to access folder is good, good practice. And then from lifestyle medicine as well, I think we can only protect our ECS, which is once again is the foundation of your health. We can only protect it through having good lifestyle medicine habits. Right? What you put into your body, this is critical, and I don't think should be undersold. Secondly, I think growth mindset is very important. Growth mindset is contrasted to fixed mindset. I see this a lot in my clinical practice. Once again, when someone talks to me and I hear how they're thinking, the people who do well in the rehabilitation process always adopt a growth mindset, which means they're open to new information. They're open to trying new things. They're open to the fact that they are powerful and they can take control of their health. I think having this openness and having this willingness to learn and being able to positively relate to the people around you is very important. I cannot undersell this once again. And I think that also should be paired towards what we talked about with vocation or purpose. If your purpose in life is to go to, let's just say, to play with your grandkids, for example, if your purpose is to travel with your spouse, I think all of those things are good purposes, but it's very important that you recognize it and then you create both short and long-term aims that you can aim towards to get to the direction that you want to go to. I think that's the narrative in your healing journey is very important. And then thirdly, I think everyone should try to help each other. I think life is treacherous already, with all of the things that's going on in the world, with how much suffering that the modern world can bring. Doing it alone is far worse. And I think if you have a community, I think if you have friends that are genuine friends, and if you have the support of each other, it really makes the journey much better. In endocannabinoid, we talk about this thing called the entourage effect, that individual things, when they come together, are more effective than the sum than they were individually. And so they call that synergy or the entourage effect. I believe it's the same way for human beings. Jason and Jackie individually might have their own abilities, but when they come together and they work with PPC together, their capability of helping their community becomes amplified, right? That's just, I guess, where I want to end this. That's my talk for today. Thanks everyone for attending.
Beautiful, Dr. Lim. Thank you so much for your time. And I think this talk has gone a long way to help us better understand a lot of these things. And it's an honor to have you as part of our group now to be able to share some of the amazing research that you're seeing in your field. So thank you so much. Because that concludes the formal presentation. We'll cut the recording and we'll move into questions.